Hello and welcome to a new episode of Dark Souls Lore. Today we'll be focusing on Dark Souls 2 and the boss of the Blue Cathedral area, a character who certainly resembles an old friend of ours. But I know you've got questions and so have I, and that's what we're here to talk about. We fought Dragonslayer Ornstein and we fought the Old Dragonslayer, but are they one and the same? Was Ornstein just an illusion? Or was what we fought in the Blue Sentinel's HQ nothing more than a spectre of a bygone age, haunting a cathedral reminiscent of Anor Londo? Hopefully, by the end of this video, we'll have some answers. My name is Alex, or Mont, and let's start with what we know, shall we? By that, I mean let's start with the facts. Something of a commodity in the Dark Souls universe. We know he's an old Dragonslayer, and we know that we fight him in the Blue Cathedral, a building located in close vicinity to Heide's Tower of Flame. And we know that this same building houses one other character, Blue Sentinel Targray, who aids the members of the Blue Sentinel Covenant, a group of arbiter spirits who both protect other phantoms from invaders and invade the guilty, seeking to punish those who have sinned. Mechanically speaking, this is very similar to the Dark Moon Covenant. Next up, we know the Old Dragonslayer drops the Old Leo Ring and his soul, and that he uses dark magic instead of lightning. So that about covers it for facts. Next up we'll talk about the evidence for and against Old Dragonslayer being the real Ornstein. First up, let me state that in my opinion, the Old Dragonslayer is Ornstein. By that, I mean he isn't just a Dragonslayer. Why do I believe that? Well, for starters, he drops the Old Dragonslayer's soul and the Leo Ring. Both of these I believe are unique to Ornstein. Let's compare the description of the ring in Dark Souls 1 and 2, shall we? First up, one of the special rings granted to the 4 Knights of Gwyn. The Leo ring belonged to Ornstein the Dragonslayer. And then next up we have the description of it in Dark Souls 2. The beloved ring of a dragon-slaying knight. Now, by itself you might argue that maybe this is someone, for lack of a better word, imitating Ornstein. Maybe he's an extreme cosplayer. Maybe. But what about the soul? Soul of the Old Dragonslayer. The Old Dragonslayer is reminiscent of a certain knight that appears in old legends. Once again, this gives us no conclusive evidence, even when compared to the original soul. Soul of Ornstein, Dragonslayer knight who guards the cathedral in the forsaken city of Anor Londo. Special beings have special souls. Lord Gwyn granted this soul to his 4 most trusted knights. Well, what do you think? Perhaps the legend of Ornstein was passed down throughout the ages, and he was thought of as some sort of cathedral guardian. Maybe. But for me, the main thing is that you can use his soul to create the Dragonslayer spear. A roncer forged from the soul of the Old Dragonslayer. The spear of the knight known as the Dragonslayer was imbued with the power of lightning, and shattered the stone scales of dragons. Strong attack unleashes its latent power. Compare that to the description of the Dragonslayer spear from the first Dark Souls game. Cross spear born from the soul of Ornstein, a Dragonslayer guarding Anor Londo Cathedral. Inflicts lightning damage, effective against dragons. Now, there is a line there that implies there were other Dragonslayers, namely, a Dragonslayer guarding Anor Londo Cathedral. That is what Ornstein is. Maybe whoever we fight in Dark Souls 2 is another Dragonslayer who is guarding the the Blue Cathedral. But, if the Old Dragonslayer is an imitation, or another knight, why would he know about that lightning association? For, as we know, the Dragonslayer in the Blue Cathedral does not use lightning, he uses dark. And let's talk about that for a moment, shall we? What is lightning and what is dark? Well, we know that the lightning element has a strong association with sunlight and divine power. As for dark, you'll probably remember that the first Dark Souls game had a damage type known as occult. It is my opinion that dark is simply the new version of occult damage, and that they are the same damage type. I believe that is supported by the Dark Ember item from the first game, wherein it is described as a forbidden black ember. And what was occult damage good for? Namely, it did decent damage against the Silver and Black Knights, and Gwyndolin, Ornstein and Gwyn. In other words, occult or dark damage in the first game was powerful against the gods, which makes sense from a lore perspective. And remember that the Ember was described as forbidden, and many hexes are also forbidden. That whole school of dark magic is it's a very taboo area in Dark Souls 1 and 2. So why would the Old Dragonslayer be using what is essentially the equivalent of a cult? Why did he use lightning? Well, of course, he used lightning damage as it was the go-to magic for fighting dragons. Gwyn's sunlight spears tore apart their scales. That was the reason they used lightning. And who is the Old Dragonslayer fighting against? Seemingly, he is guarding the Blue Cathedral from people like us, whom Dark is quite effective against. The reason I believe this was a conscious choice is that the Dragonslayer's soul does not seem to be corrupted. Maybe you are thinking that this Dragonslayer fell to the abyss, similar to what happened to Artorias, or Velstad, but if you'll remember, the soul of Artorias was black and corrupted by the abyss. When you look at it in your inventory, it's a purple blob, instead of being, gold and white. Ornstein's, though, is not. The Old Dragonslayer's soul is not. They are both white and golden. This implies to me that he consciously is using dark rather than being corrupted by the abyss. To put it in gameplay terms, he basically enchanted his weapon, or he imbued his weapon with the dark element. Remember, dragons are weak to lightning, gods are weak to darkness, and the Four Kings and other abyssal creatures are often weak to fire. As for hollows and humans, they seem to have little resistance to both dark and fire, but those are perhaps the most interesting elements. This is Dark Souls, after all. And what about the armour? Ornstein's Golden Lion armour was extremely distinctive and offered good lightning resistance. But what about the Old Dragonslayer? We can't pick that armour up, so we have no descriptions to go on. But it seems to me that the armour is darker, don't you think? I'm not sure if that's just something to do with the lighting of the game, but the armour definitely looks darker and almost more silver than gold to me. Could it be rust and dirt? Ignoring the fact that gold doesn't rust, as far as I'm aware. Or is it a different set of armour entirely? So for a moment, let's assume that the Old Dragonslayer is not Ornstein. Then, who is he? And what is he doing there? Could the Blue Sentinels have knowledge of Ornstein and worship him as one of their gods? Maybe it is tradition to guard cathedrals of the Sentinels with dragon slayers. But why doesn't Targray mention him in any capacity whatsoever, if that were the case? Did they just want to bring Ornstein back and thought that was a good place for him? Maybe. But there are quite a few references to Anor Londo in Heide, so it's also possible that it was more than that. As I mentioned earlier, I'm currently of the opinion that the Old Dragonslayer is Ornstein. But how can that be? Ornstein is surely dead at this point. Dead at the hands of the Chosen Undead? Or Smo? Well, there are two explanations for that I can think of. First up, Ornstein in Dark Souls 1 was an illusion, much like Guinevere. Personally, I don't believe that is the case, but it's something to consider. What I believe, though, is that it is Ornstein, and that he has been reborn or recycled into the world. After all four Great Lords have some presence in Dark Souls 2 in one way or another. The Witch of Izalith and Nito were each in possession of powerful Lord Souls, as was Gwyn, and Gwyn gave part of his soul to Seath. Gwyn also granted his four knights their souls, but we don't know if it was part of his soul or not, just that he granted a soul to Ornstein. But if you remember, he also granted part of his soul to the Four Kings. It seems logical to me that if he was giving a soul to his four most trusted knights, he would give them a piece of his own soul, much as he did to the Four Kings and to Seath. But, following that logic, shouldn't that mean the Four Kings have some presence in Dark Souls 2? Well, perhaps, but there's nothing really resembling the Four Kings in Dark Souls 2, unless you're thinking of a certain secret boss who lurks in the darkness. Either way, these souls are so powerful that you cannot simply erase their presence from the world, and over time, they will begin to exert influence once again. They have, I hesitate to say they have minds of their own, but these souls do have some form of will. Could it be that Ornstein's soul reforged itself over the years, and he returned? But Guinevere, Smo, all of his companions of old long ago vanished from the world. What is a Dragon Slayer to do? The lonely job of guarding a cathedral is at least something he would know, and perhaps death in battle is his only desire. A one-on-one duel to satisfy his knight's honour. But what about you? How do you explain the Old Dragonslayer and his mysterious presence in the Blue Cathedral? And what about for the next lore video? Just who should we talk about next time? I wonder.